Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. Thanks so much for joining us virtually tonight. My name is Serena Longo, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so pleased to introduce this virtual event with Heidi Pitlor, presenting her new novel, Impersonation, in conversation with Joanna Rakoff. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our expanding digital community during these challenging times. Every week, we're hosting events here on Zoom, and as always, our event schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, go to the Q&A box to submit. We'll get through as many as time allows this evening. In a moment, I'll post the link to purchase Impersonation in the chat box. Your purchases and financial contributions, I'll also be posting a link to our donations page on harvard.com. Make this virtual author series possible, and now, more than ever, support the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in support of authors and our staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We truly we sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these last few months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Heidi Pitlor is the author of the previous novels, The Birthdays and The Daylight Marriage. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and Huffington Post, and she has been series editor for the Best American series since 2007. Heidi is joined in conversation this evening by local Cambridge author Joanna Rakoff, author of the memoir My Salinger Year and the novel A Fortunate Age. They'll be discussing Heidi's new novel, Impersonation. Publishers Weekly calls it a smart and thought-provoking story that explores the complexities of feminism, privilege, and the telling of one's life story. And the New York Times writes, "Who owns your stories? How much are they worth?" Allie Lang, the main character, her answers are complicated. Watching her reach them is like sitting down with a refreshingly honest friend who skips the part about how great her life is and dives right into the real stuff. We need more friends like this, authors too. And so now I'm so pleased to turn things over to tonight's speakers. The digital podium is yours, Heidi and Joanna.
Hi. Hi, everyone. And Serena, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to do another event for the Harvard Bookstore. You're my local bookstore, and I love you. And I'm so happy to participate in these events during, as you said, this really difficult time. And I am so happy to be here. Sorry, I was just like, what is she telling me? I'm so happy to be here tonight with Heidi, who is a really dear friend of mine. And I have much more to say about her and about this book, but before I say anything, I think Heidi's just going to read the opening pages of this book, which of Impersonation. I'm not going to call it this book, like so it's like this woman, this book, so that we can get a feel for what. I think the opening pages give you a really good feel for the style of the book, for the main character who has a really strong personality and voice, and just also for the plot of the book. It kind of sets everything up. So Heidi, take it away.
Well, first, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Harvard Bookstore. I love you. I wish I could be there in person. And Joanna, it's so great to see you too. I wish we could be together in person. It's been way too long, but it's great to see your face. I haven't even seen.
I know. I feel the same way.
Oh, how has it been this long? So I'm just going to read a couple pages from the book. I don't think you really need to know anything. It's about a ghostwriter. That's all I'll say. And I'm going to hold it up. This is weird. So this is my first time reading on a screen. It's a little different. I can't see you guys, so I'm going to imagine you all there. I once saw a woman in a library pick up a biography of Mother Teresa. A few seconds later, she returned it to its display, and next she reached for a Kennedy nephew's memoir. The title, The House That Uncle Jack Built, was printed in a faux handwritten scrawl above the nephew's name, itself set in a bold Baskerville, twice as large as the title. The book could have been called Why I Love Pants. It was the man's last name that would move copies. After eyeing the front and the back, the woman tucked her hair behind one ear and read the first page. I took the woman to be in her early 40s, like me. Dressed in athletic pants, a Fendi t-shirt, and salmon-colored sneakers, she may have been just summering here in the Berkshires. I stayed less than a pace away and tried to catch a glimpse of her reaction to the moment that Peter Kennedy, as a child, stuck his hand into the eternal flame, quote, immediately searing 3 fingers. A cemetery official marched over, called me a little brat, and ordered my whole party to leave, not knowing my relationship to the deceased, end quote. What ineffable quality made people want to keep reading a book after only a paragraph or 2? At the time, I was reading a how-to book on teaching your baby to sleep. My goal was for my son and me to get more than 3 hours of rest without waking. I was also halfway through a book on the ins and outs of single parenting. In my arms, my son chose that moment to eject his pacifier and shriek in a manner both rhythmic and alarming in its goat-like tenor. The woman glanced up, and what she saw was a short, bleary-eyed person staring back at her, another woman with shoulder-length, unruly, reddish-graying hair, and an inconsolable baby dressed in a Red Sox t-shirt and a diaper. Cass had spit up on my jeans 10 minutes earlier, and the left leg was still wet where I had rinsed it in the bathroom. The woman's eyes went between me and my son while I tried to quiet him. I bobbed up and down and made pressurized wave noises in his ear, but to no avail. In order to give her some peace, I headed to the front lobby, at last reinserting my son's pacifier once I found it lodged in the neck of my hoodie. With Cass settled, I turned to see a librarian checking out the Kennedy book for the woman. I was pleased, nearly triumphant. She headed toward the entrance where we now stood, and a man bypassed her, making her stumble against us. "Excuse me," I said, although it was she who had bumped into my son. "I hope you like that book. I hear it's good." "I don't have my wallet on me," she said. She kept her eyes on my old flip-flops. "What?" I said. "I can't give you anything," she said. "What? No." I laughed a little, so taken aback that I could not think of what to say next. She reached for her phone in her handbag and hurried out the door. I stood there with Cass in my arms. Had I not signed the non-disclosure agreement, I like to think that I would have asked her to please, in the future, try to avoid these snap judgments of people. Maybe I would have asked her to check her assumptions about class. I don't know. At the very least, I would have informed her that I was the one who had written the book in her hands.
Okay, yay. So I just, okay, I'm not even sure where to start. Wow, okay, I was gonna say, I just read the book basically for the 3rd time over the last few days, and I just was so struck by, but what I realized, what I was going to say, I was so struck by just like how much it is about class and class slippage and class markers. But before we even get into that, I just want to sort of give a tiny little introduction, which is just to say that this is a book that is very close to me, which Heidi knows. Obviously not as close as it is to Heidi, who wrote it, but Heidi and I were in a writer's group together that was not what you all might think of as a typical writer's group. We weren't always sharing work. It was a little bit more of like a writer's support group in a way. But I feel like I've lived with this book with Heidi for years, like from the time she first thought of the concept of it. You know, I read numerous drafts of it and kind of watched it evolve. And as a writer, you don't get to do that often. And it's really exciting. You know, it's changed a lot. And it's still sort of true to what it was, as in like what you set out to talk about and the experience that you set out to chronicle in a way, which is like, there are many experiences, but for me, the central experience is in some ways that, even though this is a book about a ghostwriter, it's a book about a single mother who has no safety net. And how I actually got chills as I said that, because I, like, at the risk of oversharing, like, I have been that person, and I have many friends who have been that person, and it's a very scary place to be. And you, from the start, so perfectly capture what this is like for her, like, as in the constant anxiety that she lives with, as she tries to piece together a living, which she did before she had her son, but now that she has this child, you know, first of all, her ability to earn a living is compromised because she's taking care of him, but also she, of course, has to provide clothing and food and a house for him. So in many ways, it's a really harrowing book, because it's hilariously funny, and there is kind of like spot on satire as well. It's so much about this exact moment in time, both politically and, you know, in terms of our society. But that sort of central experience of Allie's is really like what the book hinges on, and you so perfectly capture it. So anyway, all of this is just to say, I'm so excited to be here and to have the chance, even though I've already asked you in life a million questions. Now, like, after reading it reading the finished book this third time, and it changed from the galley, I'm so excited to ask you questions. So, okay, basically, to start from the beginning, where did the idea for this book come from? Did it start with the idea of ghostwriting, which we're going to talk a lot about, I think, or did it start with the idea of, like, a mother with no safety net, alone with her child? Or did it start with, were they always twined together?
They were always twined together. I think they, let's see. So I wanted to write about a worker bee mom, and I wanted to write about someone who I hadn't read much in fiction. Who was this? This was someone who was educated, worked hard, did a somewhat prestigious job, had done everything right in life, and was broke. And I felt like you don't read that much of this person. You don't read about, it just felt like the missing person in fiction. So that was one impetus. And then another one was that I, as the series editor of the Best American Short Stories, I work with a big famous writer every year. And so, I know what it's like to sort of be the behind the scenes person. I have been saying this, and I'm going to keep saying this. Lana is not based on any of my guest editors, should any of them out there hear this, at all. She's pulled from thin air. Or at least know what I'm going to tell you. No, I'm just kidding. But, that feeling of trying to figure out someone else who is more high profile than you, trying to anticipate their needs, trying to almost, predict their tastes is something I know well. So I was just really interested in that relationship. And then ghostwriting has always really interested me, because it's such a weird thing. You're pretending to be someone else, and it's a big deal. I mean, you're acting. Writing fiction is acting in a way. It is its own kind of ghostwriting without a person in front of you. But ghostwriting is a different kind of thing that just really interested me. So it all kind of came at once. The politics, the class, the gender issues all came at once, and they came before the era that we live in now. So it's been a really strange experience writing it. I started this in 2015 before Trump announced his candidacy. And so it felt like I was sort of writing, the issues felt quieter then. And so now there's been a lot of, there's a lot of big issues. And I think they didn't start out this, and they've always been big issues in this country, but they weren't as loud as they are now and urgent as they are now. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. And from the start though, so the Lana character, because this book has just come out today, it's very possible, I think, that a lot of people here tonight might not have read it yet. So I'll just, the Lana character is the sort of other major female character in the book. And she is a feminist activist lawyer who teaches at Columbia's law school, but has become kind of a celebrity. Right, like she's been on like late night talk shows. She writes like a lot of op-eds and whatever for the Times. I'm trying to think of who exactly there's no one exactly like her right? Like, I can't, if there is, I can't think of it. She's not based on a real person, right? Yeah, there's no.
I had about 4 people loosely in mind, but then the world changed and they changed. So I don't even want to say who they are, because everything, it's such a, every day we live in it, we wake up to a new world. So
Yeah.
when I started it, I had kind of smudges of people, and it's just, it changes as it should for the story. So
Yeah, and like, just so everyone out there understands, like, she's very charismatic, right? Like, she's an incredible speaker, and she's done these really kind of like groundbreaking things. Like, she's sort of like very interested in class and economics, right? And she did a whole thing where she's kind of famous for this. She sent a young homeless mother out with a camera attached to her glasses and recording all the horrible things that happened to her that day. And this is just a side note, but one thing I'll mention is that there's a book that came out in the spring written by another good friend of mine, Lauren Sandler, where she basically follows a young homeless mother over her child's first year of life. And, and you wrote this before that book had come out. And I was there, if anyone out there reads that book, you'll see they're just, not that Lauren is Lana, because she's not, but just like, there's a way, what I'm trying to say really is that the Lana character, what she's doing feels very real. Like, she very easily could be, a lot of groundbreaking journalists, I don't know, she could be a lot of people. But she also is like really attractive, and she has blue hair and whatever. And so Allie is hired to write a book for her, which maybe Heidi will talk about what the book is.
Yeah, so I'm glad she felt realistic to you, and that was one of my goals in this book, was to make it almost feel like nonfiction. There's data in there, there's quotes in there, more than
it does. It feels like nonfiction a little bit.
Right, there's a lot of reality snuck in that people might not even know. So Allie, who is our ghostwriter narrator, is hired to write a memoir of motherhood for this woman who is being kind of secretly groomed for public office. And her image, her image needs to change because she's pretty radical. She has blue hair, she's out there mouthing off on Twitter, and she's just a little bit, her edges are rough, and her people think that in order to be elected, she needs to be smoothed out. And the way to do this is a memoir of motherhood. So a woman is found who is a mother and has a son, and is similar although totally different. And I don't want to give away too much, but this is the book that Allie sets out to write, and ultimately can't write, because the closer she gets to her subject, the farther her subject pulls away, and she's left with not much but her own life. So the task of writing this impossible book becomes the struggle of this book. It's a book within a book. And, and my task writing this was how to make that dramatic. How do you make someone who's sitting on their butt through an entire book? How do you make that interesting to the reader? So, I tried to not have too much desk time, and there's many other subplots and things going on, but that is the main struggle. And just her trying to find out more about this elusive woman and why she's not giving her more information.
Yeah, and there's a question always of like, she's writing this book about motherhood, but like, how devoted a mother is she? It's not clear. You're not necessarily thinking like, okay, she's a terrible mother. She's not really there. She's not really engaged with her son at all, but she's not really forthcoming to Allie. And so there's an element of suspense where you, the reader, are kind of trying to figure out what is going on here. And Heidi, I wondered, I know that you interviewed some ghostwriters as research for this book. There's a lot of research very clearly went into this book, which plays out in the very recent past. And I was wondering, do ghostwriters, is this a common experience where they're writing a book and the subject just is not forthcoming, and they just kind of have to make stuff up or guess at stuff? Do a lot of ghostwriters have this experience?
Okay, so I think every ghostwriter and every subject is completely different, much like every writer in every book. So I talk to people who kind of ran the gamut. I've talked to people who are given a paragraph and they need to write a book. I've talked to people who work, who become the best friend of their subject. But the more revealing thing to me, actually, I also talked to some political consultants. And the more revealing thing to me, because I wanted to make sure I got this right, would this happen? Could this happen? And the overwhelming, I feel sort of awful ripping the lid off something, but the overwhelming answer was yes, and it would happen much more so than it happens in this book. I mean, to a much more extreme level. Really? So that was fascinating to me, and so I almost learned more that way coming in through the political side than through the ghostwriter side. Ghostwriters are storytellers, and so I recommend that every writer write a book about a different kind of writer, because what you get are the right details. So when I interview these people, they're these incredible writers, and they knew what to tell me. I would give them what's called an elevator pitch of my book and say, it's about this. And they'd say, all right, put in this, put in that, and I didn't use exactly verbatim what they said, or I would tweak it, but it was more what I was getting from them was the psychological dynamic between someone who, the shifting power dynamic. So, the person who gets their power from being the public face, and then the person who gets their power from giving that person their words and their image in some ways. But it was so interesting. It was so interesting to research. It was by far the most interesting book that I've written to research. And then it became freakishly timely. So it felt like, it takes a while to write a book, as you know. It takes a while to hear back from this person and to go through production. And it felt that every 6 months that passed, everything changed dramatically in the world. So I'm really lucky that people still say this seems timely, because I didn't know we'd be sitting here in a pandemic.
Yeah. Yes. I want to come back to a couple of things you said, but I just want to stay on this for a second. So I of course remember when you began writing this book, and then, as you were working on it, the world changed with Trump's election. And I remember I hope this is okay to say, like at the time, I have this distinct memory of being on the phone with you. I was sitting in my car, like in East Cambridge. I don't even know why. I can't, because I never go there. I don't know why I was there. But you were talking about, how you just couldn't get off Twitter, and you were like just consumed with the news. And I was like, I had to take it off my phone. So I no longer look at, I just eliminated it. I don't look at it at all. I've changed.
So good. I was not good. You were very disciplined. I was not disciplined. Right. I remember this.
But the thing is that it ultimately, who's to say what discipline is, right? Yeah. Because ultimately your, sort of extreme involvement in what was going on really informed this book. I was, of course, working on a book set in 1971, so it wouldn't have helped me to be that involved. But it really did, because this book you could have kept it set in, I don't know, and you could have been like, forget this, I'm just going to have this set in 2010 after the global economic collapse, and that's why she has no money, or whatever. Or you could have just kept it set in 2014, 2015, but you made the choice to sort of have it span 2016, 2017 and cover Trump's election. And a lot of the events in it, some of which we haven't talked about, because a lot happens in the book. Like you were saying that it was a challenge to write about someone writing things, but that's not what the book feels like. There's a lot happens. There's a lot of, there's kind of a love story, and then there's kind of a motherhood love story, and there's just a lot about her relationship with Lana and how it evolves. And but you chose to have, and I guess the thing that I've left out is that there's also a whole thing that kind of speaks to the Me Too movement, and sort of what was the other element of what was starting to happen around that time. So I wondered, was there a certain point where you were like, you know what? I am so consumed by what's happening now that I'm going to set this book now. like almost like this book is going to unfold in real time. Like,
yeah. So no, it was the opposite. I sort of, you know, it was the strangest, it just was the weirdest thing, because again, I started this before Me Too, before Trump, before any of it. And then what happened really was this weird thing with time, where it felt like so much was happening in the world that we really lost track of time. So I remember I wasn't putting anything in there, and my editor, who I constantly sing her praises, Kathy Porres of Algonquin, I love you, I know you're out there, or maybe you're not, but you should be. But she said to me, you know, where's Me Too? And I said to her, that happened last month. And she said, no, it didn't. I said, yes, it did. And it was, you know, this crazy thing. We thought, oh my God, this past month has felt like a year, you know. And we sat down and looked at kind of all that had happened that needed to go in this book about everything that was, you know, that it was about. And it was really hard I wanted to dot it in there. I didn't want it to be the plot. I wanted this to be a book about these people, and about a mom who loves her kids and, you know, is just trying to get through each day and be a good person. And that felt like a big enough struggle. And then with everything that happened in the world, even that small thing became a political weird thing. So it was a challenge in the end, but I did put it in there. It comes, you know, again, I don't think it holds up the plot in any great way, but it needed to be in there. Sort of been disingenuous to set it any time in the recent, it just would have seemed like a really weird book not to have some of these things in there. But my hope is that they don't overpower the characters or the story, that they, you know, exist for the reader to insert their own experiences with what's happened, you know, that there's a little breathing room. So
I think that really is what happens. One tiny thing about this, which is, I just read this book that I think many people are reading right now, My Dark Vanessa, which I'm not sure if you've read.
Oh. I don't know if it sounds so good, but it sounds a little Lolita-ish, and I'm not sure I have the stomach.
Well, it's sort of like, I mean, it's kind of a gloss on Lolita. It's kind of like Lolita, but the real story in which this person is actually abused horribly and her life
no, right now, no, there's enough of that. Yeah, but it sounds amazing. I've heard amazing.
It's really kind of masterful, and I loved it. And but the thing that was interesting to me is that so I just read it and then turned back to your book and to your novel, and there's this way in which actually, like, there's kind of one paragraph in your novel that kind of comes into play in relation to some other stuff, that some other plot points basically, and I'm not really giving anything away, where I hope I'm not, where it's really in the first like 20 pages of the book, where Allie reveals, like, so you see Allie, I mean, in the first scene, she's mistaken for a homeless person, right? And she's like scraping together a living, like she'll get like a 3-day landscaping job or whatever. And I feel like, as an aside, I should mention that, you know, in my life as a writer, I have known so many people who, and I'm thinking of specific people who I'm obviously not going to name, but I mean people who have had like full-length profiles in a major magazine, you know, as in like they have been profiled, they're the subject of the profiles. People who have had like front page of the New York Times book reviews of their books, and yet they, you know, are essentially on food stamps. Like they're not, you know, I think we all have. And there's kind of a, you know, kind of, I suppose it's kind of like a dirty secret of the literary universe.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's a little known thing that's uncomfortable to talk about, is that some glamour businesses, how poor some people are in them. I think it's not just publishing. I think there's other industries too. You know, the workers are not always, it's pretty tragic. And so these people are side by side. I'm sorry, my dog is now being a pain and wants up, but I'm not going to give him up. So, you know, I think it's a weird and tragic kind of sign of the times and of income inequality that these people are side by side with, you know, people who are incredibly privileged and working for them. I mean, obviously, but these are the businesses where you really see it.
Yeah, because you see that there's this, and I was thinking about this when I was thinking about, what I might say in my little introduction, which I didn't say. And one of the things is that in our life together as friends and as writers, I think one of the things that has often brought us together is that we have had this experience of being working writers, that so we know many people, some of whom are like truly incredible writers, but who have the cushion of, let's say, I don't know, family money, or like a spouse who earned a lot of money, and so some of them might make a good amount of money from their work, but it's not, they don't need it to buy food, whereas like we both. So this is something that we've talked about a lot, and so you see this in a sort of really extreme way with Allie, and I think you're right that this is like it's a dirty secret of lots of arts industries, that there's this kind of bulk of people who somehow have a cushion, and then there's this world of people who don't, who no matter how successful they are, it's always subsistence living. And so what I was going to say about Allie is just that, so you see her kind of being mistaken for a homeless person. She's living in this really hand-to-mouth, scary way. Like I felt so scared for her. The first time I read a full draft, I just felt scared for her the whole time. Like I understood what was going on. And I was like, this is terrifying. I'm so scared she's going to end up homeless, and and so, but you find out, this is really where I was going. It took me a while to get there. Just that there's a little bit of an explanation here, which is that she actually went to Dartmouth and was kind of going places as a writer, in the kind of, maybe in like the academic world. She didn't know for sure. But then, she discovers that her mentor at Dartmouth, like he sort of hits on her in this gross way, and she kind of retreats from all of that, and retreats from Dartmouth, and retreats from that identity. And that's also what happens in this book, My Dark Vanessa, that this woman's life is ruined. At every turn, there's someone sexually preying on her. And so she like abandons an academic career because her mentor she realizes, preying on her. So, I guess my point is like the scaffolding of the book is so built on the way, that these kind of, I don't know, like societal infrastructural inequities determine a person's life, right?
Yeah.
Really awkward thing.
Absolutely. And I think, to me, the more interesting, well, that is interesting. I think what my book hopefully is interesting. But I thought what was interesting was to examine the ways that this person then wanted to become invisible, which is what led her to ghostwriting. And anonymity, and the safety of anonymity for a woman, to not look like anything, to not exist in some ways. There's real safety in that. And that's what that's a sort of subtext of this book of why would someone want to be a ghostwriter, a woman, a single woman? Well, this is one of the reasons. And, I just think anonymity itself is really interesting in the power behind it, and what it does afford a person, not just what you're losing from it, but what you're gaining. So that sort of ties back to that moment in this book where she's had some sort of marker moments in the past where she, I didn't want her to be sexually assaulted. I felt like the narrative of that there are a lot of them out there, and it's a horrible thing, but I wanted to do something a little different in this book, and I wanted it to be blurry. I wanted there to be some female complicity or not moments. I wanted it to be more morally ambiguous, which I hope it is. I wanted you never to know who the bad guy really is in this book. And in the end, I'm not going to say who or what it is, but my hope is that it's not what the reader thinks it is at the beginning.
Yeah, I think you do such a good job of it. Like throughout the whole book, you really don't know, like things keep shifting, and you want to sort of believe in certain people, but you're like, oh, I don't know. And you don't know, like no one is bad, no one is good. there are moments where I think you get frustrated with Allie and you're like, why didn't you just, stay in that job? Why didn't you just keep that clothing? Like, why didn't you just use your degree, and, but then you sort of go back and sort of feel this incredible sympathy for her. And it kind of all seems very understandable. I just want to pause for one moment to remind everyone that if you have questions for Heidi, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can ask a question at any time. So the questions will accrue. And I'd say like probably in about 6 minutes, I will turn to questions and ask them of Heidi. So if you have questions, now is the time to start asking them. And yes. So, okay, I guess I'm trying to, because I feel like I have one more question for you. I'm like, what is the most important question to ask? I was wondering, to me, there's a way in which this book has us, I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. And I feel like I should precede it by saying that, so Heidi and I met 7 years ago when I moved to Boston from New York, but I was already a fan of hers.
You were not. Were you? You were not. I was a fan of yours.
And, well, I think I told you this. If you guys haven't read her first novel, The Birthdays, it's wonderful. It's like a big kind of like family story, but to me, it was very much up my alley. It has the feel a bit of a Victorian novel. It has like a real heft to it. And it's wonderful. And I think I told you this, Heidi, but like when my first novel came out, I did an event at McNally Jackson in Soho. And when you do an event there, they give you like a ticket for a free book. And because I'm me and I overthink everything, couldn't decide on a book that night. And I kept going back to McNally Jackson and trying to decide. And the book I wanted was The Birthdays. And I went back like 10, and I was like, should I get this or should I get War and Peace? I feel like I should and finally that was the book I chose with my McNally Jackson chick and read it.
But you chose War and Peace or The Birthdays?
No, I chose The Birthdays.
You did? Thank you. Wow. Did you ever read War and Peace?
I've never read War and Peace. No. My 15-year-old son has. I have not.
We will. Someday.
So, but to me, so I read and loved all your books, and also like many of your essays and what have you. And I'm a friend and I'm a fan. But this book has both an intimacy and an urgency to it. It's very different. All three of your books are different from each other. Like you kind of reinvent yourself with each book. Yeah. But this book has such an intimate feel. And, it's written in the first person. So obviously that gives it a more intimate feel. But there are many different types of first person narrators. Like there's a first person narrator who's really holding you at arm's length. And that's not the case with Allie. Right. And I wondered if that was what you set out to do, because you're reading this heavy volume of short stories and kind of like honing what you want from fiction. And did you feel like I want to write a very intimate book?
Yes, for sure. I think I start every book with a new challenge. So this was the first book I wrote from one point of view, one sustained point of view. My other books have multiple points of view. Right. Close third person, so that which is much more. You can be much more nimble as a writer. You can, play around and go. If you hit a slow spot, you jump to someone else's head. But if you're stuck with one person and you're writing in the first person, to me, it's the hardest. First person present tense would have been harder because that's just there's nowhere to go. You're in the moment. You're boom, 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 boom. It's very hard to jump around time-wise. So I didn't want to do present tense, but I did want to write first person. And in terms of intimate, I wanted her to be a really honest person. I wanted her to kind of be seeking the truth, both about herself and the world and her clients, but also manipulating it at the same time. So in order for it to to get there, it needed to be intimate because we need to know what's her version of the truth. And she has kind of an odd way of talking or thinking, but also she just came really naturally to me. She just seemed like someone who was really smart and loving and didn't, there was a few things. I didn't want her to have the typical female hangups. I didn't want her to have body issues. I didn't want her to hate sex. I didn't want her to have, a lot of the issues that in some ways she was created more as I don't want her to be this way than I want her to be this way, which, and it happened really easily. I just wanted her to kind of have different, issues, which are, I guess, in some ways kind of male issues. How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to make the world a better place? She has a truck. She blasts music. She smokes pot. She doesn't care. She just doesn't care. She's not consumed with typically, things that one might find in another book. And it was really fun to write that. It was really fun to just throw off certain shackles and have her also just sort of be able to, the book starts where she's writing. So after she gets, she has her little incident in the library. Hopefully I'm not giving away too much, but she has to write from the point of view of kind of a bro-y video game, really successful TV producer guy. And she's just kind of like, okay, shake it off. Here we go. I'm a jerk and I'm proud to be a jerk. And she's sort of a chameleon. And I thought that was really interesting. In some ways it was hard to track her down because she was having a hard time tracking herself down. But with enough drafts and revision and enough of my wonderful editor's input, hopefully it got better, as I worked it through. So we'll see.
Yeah, I did notice that she's not really concerned with her appearance. Like
No.
She's in her 40s, but
No.
right, but she's not worried. She's not like,
home, and she's worked really hard. She's anonymous. She's invisible. Being concerned with her experience has gotten her into trouble in the past. So, when she was at Dartmouth and she was sexually harassed by a professor, or she for 10 years lived in New York working for an equity firm, and kind of became one, like what do you call it, a boys girl. She went out with all the guys after work, and so being somewhat attractive got her into trouble. So she sort of makes this decision. I'm just going to work from home and wear crap, and this doesn't have to be a part of my life anymore. But that gets you into trouble in a different way. So that's what this book is.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like we have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to start in on them. Okay. So how do you think, this is from an anonymous person, so anonymous attendee, how do you think ghostwriting overlaps with the social media landscape of today? That's a great question.
Oh, it is a great question. Oh my gosh, it absolutely does. Images, this book is all about image and artifice, I would say. The word artifice was just in my head almost the whole time I was writing this, which, I think Facebook might be the most artificial place out there, but even not. I think that we are in an age of image, and we are in an age of quick, fast, what's your brand? What are your words? How quickly can you sum up who you are, present it to the world, and what can you get out of that? So in this book, social media plays a big part. I really enjoy, I'm the weird writer who likes writing about technology, and, there's a lot of Twitter in this book. There's a lot of IMs, emails, texts. So there is that kind of quick, snappy way of communicating that appears in this book, but I think there's a lot of overlap. And we, right now, I don't need to say too much about the current moment or who's running the country and what image making can rot upon us. What happens when people ally themselves with someone else they think is like them, no matter what they're really like. We're not in a time where we are taking a lot of time to get to know people on deep levels, and because of social media largely. So it's dangerous, but the flip side of that is it connects people, and especially now during the pandemic, I think it can be a really good thing too, in providing a sense of community and connection for people who might not otherwise have it. That's the wishy-washiest answer, but that's what I have for you tonight.
Okay. It's from Susan Shepard. She says, I find her relationship with the lots of sack guy. By the lots of sack guy, this is the writer that, this is the TV producer. He's kind of like a showrunner guy that Heidi mentioned. So she says, I find her relationship with the lots of sat guy so interesting. She flirts with him as a way to get him to talk more openly. And then she is going to meet up with him and worries that flirtation may stop when he meets her, when he realizes her age, sees what she looks like. That seems so realistic and also so tricky given Me Too. Can you talk about that?
Thank you, Sue. And tricky, yes. I think it's, so before Me Too, let's go back a few years for those of us who are old enough. I think that one thing I was interested in exploring in this book was female complicity. Not as much in Me Too as, not as much as in, overt sexual harassment and assault as in, the subtler threads that uphold misogyny and sexism. So, I don't know if you remember this time in publishing, but there's a time, I think if we go back 10 years, office flirtation was not an uncommon thing. And it might not have been, I am going to flirt with this person to earn more money. There's a certain subcutaneous kind of thing that you would get something if you would flirt with someone, and it would feel good, and you get acceptance from someone who's more powerful than you. Right or wrong, that is the way that things used to be. And I wanted to explore that a little bit in this book, and I wanted to explore her not being able to use that anymore, both by virtue of her anonymity, her age, which is a thing, her realizing what it's going to be like to be with this guy who's very, very looks focused and very, he's a, what did she call him? The tons of sack guy? We'll call him a tons of sack guy. And you can read the book to find out what that means. But he's, he likes his women, and he likes them young, and he likes them to look a certain way. And she's kept herself, she's been able to work with him by being a little vague about who she is and letting him get away with some stuff. And by appearing before him physically, she's outing herself in a way that she knows she's not going to be as attractive to him. And then it turns out that it sort of works out okay in person, and other things go wrong. But it's, I wanted to get at some of the nuances that aren't always gotten at. It's a minefield. Talking about this stuff is a ridiculous minefield, and I hope that I got it right in this book. I didn't set out to offend anyone. I just sort of wrote about the things that I know and have seen.
Well, I think I'll add like one sentence, which is just, I think with that guy, as a person who has like a foot in the film and TV industry, I think with that guy, so there's a way in which that industry, until pretty recently, actually rewarded guys like that who had this kind of like machismo to them, and who walked around and, they would go into, so he's a showrunner, right? And he would go into meetings with producers and be like, and it's almost like a persona, like he's a caricature, right? He's like, my reticulated python has his own like room with a view of, the ocean or whatever. Like he's ridiculous. And I think there's a way in which like he almost knows that. He's like, I'm the caricature of like the horrible sexist, like Comic-Con, whatever showrunner guy.
Right.
And then the world changed, and suddenly it was all over for that guy, and like Lars von Trier and whatever, and like everyone, it was all over. And
absolutely.
That's
right.
The best thing that has happened. But like, you can't, it was cool to be that guy. And like, I think people were trying to be that guy. You kind of see it in some of the TV shows that
absolutely.
Hollywood, right? Like Entourage and a ton of others. I'm now not going to list a million of them, but anyway, and so she's working for him right at the moment when like the world changed. So when she starts to work for him, she knows that she has to play into his idea of himself in order to get what she needs. She needs material for the book to make the book good so that she gets lots of money. And, you know, and like when you are working for a living, you do what you have to do. So anyway, but she also like, she's very smart and she gets it. She gets that she has to play into his idea of himself. So that was way more than one sentence, but anyway. Okay.
No, that's it.
Well,
One more quick thing to say is the funnest thing, and it was sort of a hall of mirrors, was having her write him. So for her to step in and be the machismo guy, and then for me to be the person who's imitating the machismo, it was just so fun and so weird. And, you know, like to write two people that are so far removed from you it was so much fun. I mean, writing can sometimes just feel like playing, and this was one of those moments where it really did.
Yes. And I think, you know, Heidi, we haven't totally talked about this, but, you know, as you know, I have a friend who is a ghostwriter, a very successful ghostwriter. And we can't say, like, there are some books that she's written where she, you know, has kind of, her name is on the cover and everyone knows she's written them. And then there are others where she's not, so I can't talk about them. But she's often in these like crazy situations where, you know, whoever she's writing about is like, join me on my private plane, you know?
You can't say who she is, can you, if her name is on some covers?
I guess I could. I think.
Well, there's a reason why, but I don't know if we want to.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we want you to say it, but I don't want to screw anyone over.
I know exactly. I'll just say that she ghost wrote for Eddie Izzard, and I don't know if her name was on the cover, but she was you know, the world knew that she worked with him as a co-writer.
Okay.
And
so
but then for
other
her
name.
Her name is Laura Zigman, and I'm the reason.
So thank you, because she's my last event. She's going to interview me. She's my last person.
Okay, so the reason I want to say her name is because she also is. I feel like I just want to say that she's a wonderful, wonderful fiction writer.
She's a wonderful writer, right?
Oh, she's so good. And her last book, Separation Anxiety, is amazing, and her first book, Animal Husbandry, is amazing. And yeah,
she's hilarious. She's wonderful, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. I read them. They're so good. So yes, but she's been in these situations that I of course can't name where like she, you know, she's with like huge celebrities and they're like taking her with, you know, like this is not real, but like, they're like, let me take you sailing on my yacht and you can interview me.
I know.
You know, and so it's just so weird. Like when you think about, you know, Allie in her like rented falling apart house in the Berkshires, and she's writing in the voice of this guy who has a room for his pet python, you know, it's like,
I don't think it's a Birkin bag, but something.
Yes.
And
he sends her a Gucci bag, which is like the least useful thing to her life.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Gucci.
But it makes total sense. It's like so perfect. Okay. Let's see. We have a few more questions. We'll see what we can get through. I think we can get through all of them. Okay. If I stop talking. You recommended that writers, this is from another anonymous person. You recommended that writers try writing about other kinds of writers. When you were interviewing ghostwriters, what questions got the juiciest answers or stories? What sorts of questions entice authors in those kinds of interviews?
Oh my goodness, that's another good question. Okay, let me think. What kind of questions got, so these, again, ghostwriters are the best storytellers that you've ever met. So you don't even need to entice them. You know, when I said I'm writing a novel about this, they said, "Oh, great." And I would say just getting them talking about their clients, if they would admit who they'd worked with, or sort of saying, trying to get behind their motivations. So there's a certain kind of, I don't know what the word is, but there's like a Wizard of Oz vibe you get to them, which is like, nobody knows the power I have, which is true, you know? So the juiciest answers would come from them telling me the things that they had gotten that no one would know about. This person's my closest friend. This client told me I was the first person they told they were pregnant, or this person flew me to to the Greek islands and whatever, or it just sort of saying what's the, what are some of the crazy things you've gotten? What are some of the hardest moments that you've had when someone wouldn't wasn't telling you something. How does it usually work? You know, these are people, again, who know from good stories. And I barely had to even like scratch to get salacious, wonderful, amazing details right away. You know, I think that there's a lot of joy in this work. There's a lot of power in this work. When you're doing well and when you're getting paid what you should get paid, it's a really wonderful thing to do. And they don't have to deal with, you know, having a public image. They can go to the store, they can say, you know what, I'm this person, but you'd never know it. And I think there's a certain kind of real deliciousness to that, to walking around, you know, as someone else, but not really. So the people that I talked to a range of ages, which was really interesting. I talked to people that did business books. I talked to people that did exercise guides. I've talked to, you know, so for well-known people. So there was such a wide range, and each person had such a wildly different personality. I think that there wasn't really a standard question that got them to come out. It was figuring out, how do I connect with this person as a writer, and how do they connect with their subjects?
Okay, let's see what else we have. So I think this question, did you talk with any real ghostwriters, blah, 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 when you were writing the book, has been answered. So we're going to skip that one.
Okay.
Oh, but here is a great question that has not been touched on that much. How did your own experience as a mother influence the book? And I'll say this, so this is our last question right now. If anyone has any burning questions, you should type them up right now, because otherwise this is our last question.
Yeah, we're at the hour mark. So how did my experience as a mother inform? So Allie's son is younger, and I started this book a long time ago. And, you know, I think just the vulnerability of new motherhood was surprising to me. And I put a lot of that in the book, the isolation, the feel. I had twins, which was, you know, Allie feels like she doesn't really fit in with other mothers. And as a mom of twins who worked a lot, I didn't really feel like I fit in with the world of mom so much. So I put a lot of that in there. I mean, there's tons of my experience in there. The feeling of dropping your kid off at preschool and being so glad for these warm preschool teachers who seem to know how to talk, you know, toddler in a way that you don't. The people who innately know how to deal with babies, and you know, and you just don't. You know, I think Allie, there's some of that in there. There's that kind of fierce, protective mama bear thing that's in there. I mean, almost everything about what it feels like to be a mother for me. Not everything, because I'm not going to put some of the more unflattering things in there, but you know, and the intense mom friendships you have, the intense connection you feel because if you're real with another person, if you're vulnerable and allowing yourself to be real about how scared you are as a mom, there's some of that in there. I think, you know, Allie's friendships are really an important part of this book too. They might not occupy as much as the, you know, airtime as much as the primary plot, but they're what sustain her in a certain way, and her relationship to other women, and you know, how she feeds these relationships by being true, and how the friends feed those relationships by being true, and how they kind of ebb away from each other when they're not being true to themselves, which all feeds into the idea of impersonation and artifice, and how that plays into life. So
maybe that's a great note to end on.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Serena, what do you think?
Sounds great. Yeah. Thank you both. That was so wonderful.
Thank you so much, you guys. Thanks everyone for watching. I'm so dark now. I feel like the sun set or something. I hope you can see me.
We can see you just fine. You're a little dim, but you know,
it's okay. It's probably
the days are getting shorter. Thanks to both of you, and thanks to everyone out there for spending your evening with us. If you haven't purchased tonight's book yet, click the link in the chat or simply head to harvard.com and search for Impersonation. Thanks again for your support, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, have a good night, keep reading, and be well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.